this question, which is in the great Judeo-Christian tradition, we have been brought up with our own understanding of the universe and the supreme deity, and anything that might threaten to upset that understanding is suspect at best and heretical at worst. And if indeed we have a fundamentalist outlook, and by fundamentalism I mean very specifically an understanding of our religious traditions, beliefs, the underpinnings of our understanding of God that are so rigid that there is no room at all for allegory, for misunderstanding, for an actual event to be embedded in a holy book in terms that are seen as literal. And this has nothing to do with the religion itself, whether it's Christian, Jewish, Islamic. These are not the questions. But if you are a fundamentalist thinker, and you may be a secular fundamentalist thinker, this is a subject that you will not bend around. And I think right there that another reason that maybe we, the government officialdom of this country, are sitting on this subject is perceived upsets as to how this will be received by folks within the fundamentalist religious community who, as we know, are capable of extreme violence. And I'll just be blunt about that when confronted with a situation that they find untenable. Last week, sadly, the most recent event occurred not here, but in the extremely civilized and I would say advanced country of Norway, where random violence is a lot rarer than it is in the United States. And there, a man purporting to be a Christian fundamentalist, very far right, murdered dozens of people for a point of ideology and hoping that he would set in motion a race war. Not that much different than Timothy McVeigh on a certain level, or Taliban on another level. This kind of thinking, especially when it's in the name of God, is very dangerous. And I feel very seriously that a wholesale announcement of the reality and the implications of other intelligences coming and going for a small section of our populace could set off violence. And let me take that a step beyond, because I realize as I'm speaking, your audience deserves clarification and clarity on this. What I'm zoning in here on is if I take literally that there are no aliens, there are no extraterrestrials, as fundamentalist Christians believe. It's all demonology. It's all Satan playing tricks on us. That if we were to understand that, quote unquote, the government of the United States has just made an announcement, you know, the president has spoken, other world leaders have backed him up, that indeed we're not alone. We are guilty of having covered this up for decades. We're going to do our best now to educate people to it. That there is a small segment of the population that would say the United States government is now either at best being fooled by satanic forces or is in league with them. Therefore, as a good American and a good Christian, it is my responsibility to attack. After all, in functionally identical terms, isn't that what we're seeing in part with fundamentalist Islam, seeing us as the devil, we Americans, and acting, you know, theologically to drive us out of their part of the world. Again, I know that I've strayed into some very touchy territory here, but I think it links up directly with yet another reason that this phenomena is repressed, is distorted, is belittled, and that we, again, are so deeply conditioned to see it as anathema to, sane reality, that it's nonsense on one level or another, and I'd rather do anything than look at it as a real possibility, because the implications are very upsetting to me and my family, so much better that these people are crazy or they want to be on a show.
Absolutely. There's such a great danger in anyone who is so consumed with a particular idea that they believe that violence against any other being is acceptable, and of course that would include extraterrestrials. And it's when you mentioned the horror story for coming out of Norway, it makes meeting a Gray seem pretty tame by comparison.
Yeah. Well, let's face it. I'm working on 2 presentations right now for not a UFO conference, but a scientific conference I'll be speaking at next week, and of all places, Central Greece. I will be their UFO speaker relative to the work of a scientist who observed and reported on UFOs and was maligned because of it. But one of the things that I'm going through these past days is scanning in any number of documents for my PowerPoint presentation. And one of my favorite documents in terms of the tremendous archive that people like us have accumulated of these are all real. These are all authentically declassified intelligence and military documents, and within the research community, we certainly have thousands of them. One of the first absolutely seminal, important ones was Project Sign, which was discreetly issued in February of 1948. We're talking, more than 60 years ago, and there are points in that Air Force study. It's the first significant, lengthy study of what these things may or may not be. They do talk about, above all else, at this time, post-war, we should expect to see such phenomena if there is intelligent life in space. Why? And this is the Air Force that I'm paraphrasing here. It sounds like the day the Earth stood still, but this is an official point of view that they are now observing for the first time activity on Earth that can be measured from space, namely the detonation of nuclear devices. And in 100 years or so, we're going to be out in space with our rocket technology that we're quickly developing, bigger and bigger weapons, and our same violent human psychology. So above all else, they should be interested in what is going on here. Again, I'm paraphrasing, but this is an official, secret Air Force, highly, highly classified and very respected report from 1948. We have understood part of what's been going on here, since our grandparents were around, and you and I, our parents, and in some cases our grandparents, have all been had. And for me, and I know for you as well, James, we see part of our job as trying to educate, doing our best to educate people, not to believe or disbelieve. This has nothing to do with what you can tolerate or choose to handle. It has to do with actual post-war history. Reading the documents, becoming familiar with the players, reading the most scholarly books and reports on the subject, and being open to understanding that things may not be the way we perceive. Better to be open and be mistaken than to rigidly reject something simply because it doesn't fit into your understanding or your matrix or your choice of the way that the world is around us, no matter what we were taught in childhood, by our parents, by our religious leaders, or by the world at large.
We have to be ready.
Yeah. And hopefully there are some folks who are listening to this show right now, some of whom are going, yep, it's great to hear two guys talking about this. What they're saying reflects some of my thinking that I'm either reticent to express because I don't do this professionally and I don't want to have people making fun of me behind my back, or I am that outspoken person in my circle of friends, and I am the one that says, yes, I take this seriously, even if I didn't have a sighting or I did have a sighting. And there's another important point. The whole notion of seeing a UFO and having that wired up with being delusional or wacky or a quirky character or a believer or what have you. What we're talking about here is that you look up and you observe something in the sky that is an unidentified flying object. You and I grant that many if not most, or the overwhelming majority of UFOs per se, are explainable in conventional terms. But to paraphrase our friend and colleague Stan Friedman, the question is not, are all UFOs representative of advanced technology from other locations? The question is, has one ever been? The answer to that when one spends time studying the official government documents, as well as literature, as well as the best accounts, as well as the best evidence, is an overwhelming yes, of course. We are not alone. For me, where they come from, another planet, another universe, another dimension, another time, the inside of the Earth, the future, it's a moot point. I don't care. Probably variations on some of those. Do they mean us well? Do they not mean us well? I don't know. Do they think of us as, are they us a million years in the future? Or are we somebody's graduate experiment not going very well right now?
No, I guess it isn't. And that's very true. We seem to be having a lot of difficulties.
This week in particular.
Yes. I would like to take that opportunity, Peter, to take a break from this Inception radio network broadcast produced by Epic. And right now we're going to take a break, and we will be back to try and decide what all of this means. I would like to, in the time remaining, talk about some of the successes and failures that we're having trying to investigate and get the information out to the public. And I think that you are the perfect person to be able to discuss this sensitive subject with, without getting too personal or naming too many names or organizations.
Yeah. Well, let me jump in here and say that in any area of research, be it natural or manufactured, so to say, whether or not we're structural engineers discussing tolerance in materials, or marine biologists discussing a species, there are going to be differences of opinion, and different professional organizations or peer groups, which like-minded individuals or people that are following a similar career path may join. Some of them because it's an opportunity to network with more of your colleagues. Others, it's a good political move, to have an affiliation with an organization where you may get some work or respect or, opportunities to publish, that kind of thing. And right now, and this is a perfectly natural phenomena in the human world, there are disagreements going on in the field of UFO-related research, not just about what it is indeed that we are looking at, but the best way to, for people that study the subject to get together and make a difference. Organizations, for me, divide up into several groups. There are organizations that are miniature democracies, and that we elect our officers, that members have a say in the governance and the bylaws. Other organizations are private organizations, and one joins them understanding that you are a member. If you move up the ladder, it's by a combination of work, politics, schmoozing, so to say, insinuating yourself, making contributions of material or intelligence sorts. And right now, it's another cycle that we're going through where quite a number of us around the country who are serious contributors to this field are in disagreements on certain aspects of organizational rights and wrongs, what we would like to see versus what we are seeing. I think, though, that open dialogue, even though there's a certain amount of vitriol that comes out when we disagree with folks, is always a good thing. And in fact, a very good example is that sometimes disagreements or unworkable situations where we can't get exactly what we want with an existing structure force people of good intent to go out and create something on their own. And so there are a number of newer regional UFO organizations and groups that have been growing and establishing themselves in different parts of the United States more than normal over the past year or so, in great part because of conflicts with a larger existing organization. And, you know, I for me, one of the phrases that I like a lot goes back to the Watergate era, and a very tough, no-nonsense federal judge who would have presided over the trial of Richard Nixon had the impeachment gone full and Mr. Nixon not resigned, and Judge John Sirica. And relative to Watergate, his quote, which I will never forget and often cite myself, is, "Let the chips fall where they may." And so be it in the current situation.
I think that that's a really good analysis, and I guess the only comment I would make about my own situation is that I felt like a lot of this is a personal evolution.
Yes.
And I sort of felt like I had to make a change, and it reminded me, I hadn't thought about it until you were describing it, when I left a police department where I had been a totally loyal and dedicated officer for 20 years, and I thought that I was a valuable employee because they told me I was, and I injured my knee, and therefore there was a possibility there could be, you know, litigation or compensation due me, and one day you're a valuable employee, and the next day you're the enemy.
I remember discussing this with you when we first met, James, and this for me is a all too human tragedy that we see often in this extremely litigious age when a good person is not necessarily defined by their good works, but by their potential to throw a little mayhem into the existing order based on a situational change, and being injured on the job is one of them. All of a sudden, you know, I think it's probably a lot more dramatic in terms of working in enforcement than, say, you know, in an accounting office or something, but it's sort of a common functioning principle. We would rather get rid of you than have you come back at us with a legal action, even though up until yesterday you were one of our best people.
And I guess that's the way it goes, so to speak. The bringing it back around to UFOs, I wanted to point out, and one of the reasons that I wanted so much to have this interview with you, and one of the reasons why I believe that your work is so important, is that one of the hardest things, I think, for people who are studying UFOs is to keep some sense of balance and keep it reasonable and stay somewhat logical, you know, something that can be explained to everyone.
Yeah.
It's so easy to drift off into all of these strange tangents.
Yeah. Well, you know, James, I'll underscore that and take it one more step, which is, and I have colleagues, we have colleagues who I think the world of personally, but I have tremendous agreements with on their methodology. I think once you've established yourself as, an individual in the field and made contributions, be they in the form of books, research papers, lectures, articles, what have you, it is incumbent upon you to approach every new investigation with the most rigorous kind of skepticism that you are capable of. And what I mean by that specifically is, let's take you or I. between us, we have, more than half a century in the field. Hundreds of studies, cases, individuals that we've met, known, every kind of physical evidence that we've seen. We have reached the point in legal jurisprudence where we understand this subject to be real and genuine beyond a reasonable doubt. It's proven to me that we're dealing with a truly anomalous phenomena. That puts a special onus on me to never preclude going into a new case just because I know it's real, that this one will be too. In fact, just the opposite. For me, you're guilty until proven innocent on a certain level. I have to, and for me as an investigator, and I'm self-trained with some wonderful teachers, again, a ranking military historian, a highly decorated detective sergeant from the New York City Police Department, my dear friend, mentor, and colleague Bud Hopkins, whose own methodology is extraordinary, and a fictional character, somebody who I became really a fan of or enamored by, however you want to call it, by the time I was about 12 years old, and that was the invention of the wonderful British writer Arthur Conan Doyle, his character Sherlock Holmes. One of the things that I always admired about the Holmes character, and it's wonderfully characterized in the novels of Conan Doyle and many treatments that we've seen filmatically or on television, is something called deductive reasoning. Deductive reasoning, you are faced with a mystery, and you begin your exploration, your investigation of the mystery by looking into the most mundane, the most boring, the most absolutely, vanilla kind of explanation. You investigate it fully. If it is not that, you take one small step up to the second most mundane, and you keep going. Now, this is a pretty boring way to work. For me, though, it's the only way to work in this, because once you have reached the point where you have investigated every possibility, and again, I point listeners back to Project Sign, this Air Force classified report from 1948, which runs almost 50 pages. It's a brilliant example of deductive reasoning. They go through every possible explanation it may or may not be. And I think you're like almost 25 pages in by the time you see the two words, rather quaint at the time, of spaceships. And then they start discussing the possibilities and the pros and the cons. So for you or I to base an investigation on our belief or our knowledge even that UFOs are real, and some of them do represent truly mysterious situations, advanced technology from parts unknown, if you will, that is enough for me to, sink your credibility or really hurt it as an investigator. And for me, that is a not-so-secret weapon of looking into casework. There are people out there in our field, because let's face it, in order to be a UFO investigator, what are the credentials again? Oh, yes, you touch your finger to your nose, you turn around 3 times, and you say, I'm a UFO investigator. We don't have university degrees in this. We don't go to special training schools. And there are people that approach it and say, well, my investigation is based on this channeled 5,000-year-old disembodied spirit who has told me the following. And then I read this book on esoteric mysticism, and it confirmed this point here. And then I interpreted a cave painting, and then, blah, blah, blah. And for that person, that actually is, their methodology, which they're welcome to, but for me, doesn't really wash. I have been criticized for being rather plausible, nuts and bolts, but I'm very proud to say that I was taught to investigate UFOs the same way, or in many respects the same way, that law enforcement personnel would investigate a disappearance, a felony, a mystery or a unaccounted loss of materials or what have you. And that is very 3D, real-world stuff.
Absolutely. In fact, I believe it's the reasonable man or reasonable woman, and we're always taught to argue to them. In other words, could a jury be sold on this?
Exactly so. Exactly so. And I'm proud to say that the book that I co-wrote with my dear friend Larry Warren, an American hero of the First Order, an expatriate, and now living in Liverpool, England, who was an Air Force security police officer in 1980, was a witness to a shatteringly real UFO event near an American NATO base in southeastern England, and who went on to become the whistleblower for this seminally important case and caught holy hell because of it. That book opens and closes in so many words as a legal brief. You know, you are going to be the judge and jury here. These are the evidences that we are going to put forward, and you're going to be the one to have to decide what the reality is of this case and whether or not we were able to make our case at the end of 540 pages.
And that's the only way that we can do this. And I should also announce that that book is called, by the way, Left at Eastgate by Larry Warren and Peter Robbins, forward by Bud Hopkins. I recommend that you get the updated edition, subtitled A First-Hand Account of the Rendlesham Forest UFO Incident, Its Cover-Up and Investigation. And I do need to announce right now, Peter, certainly you'll have the opportunity to make any further remarks. I know that you want to talk about the Exeter, New Hampshire event, but I need to announce right now that those who wish to make a telephone call to this program can reach Inception Radio and this program at 1-888-919-2355. Again, that's 1-888-919-2355. In any event, we are certainly open for questions through the chat room. So I'm hoping that we have something further coming along there and we can continue with our discussion.
Yeah, as far as the events in Exeter, this is not a big UFO conference. This is a local event that is sponsored and in part organized this year by the Exeter, New Hampshire Kiwanis Club. It is very much a grassroots event. The speakers, and it is quite a speakers lineup, I think, in many respects. It's a wonderful first introductory event for any listeners, especially if you're in the Northeast, to go to get a feel for this subject, the people that are involved in it. It takes place on Saturday, September 3rd. The website is very easy to remember, ExeterUFOFestival.com. But in fact, it is a series of speakers rather than a festival. And they include Kathleen Martin, again, a wonderful presenter and one of our best scholars in the field. She will be speaking on the experience of her uncle and aunt, which we are heading into the 50th anniversary of 1961, September 19th, as James has told us. And she will be accompanied there by certainly one of the best-known figures in UFO studies in the world, not just in the nation, and that is Stanton T. Friedman, nuclear physicist, lecturer, and one of the most prolific writers and public speakers in the history of this subject. I'm also absolutely delighted to announce the addition of a dear friend and colleague, our leading, most vocal historian in this area, and that's Richard Dolan, author of a number of absolutely crucially important books. The first 2 volumes of 3-volume set of UFOs in the National Security State, AD, After Disclosure, which he's written with his co-author Bryce Zabel, and also not as well-known, but extremely important folks in the field working away on a daily basis, Steve Fermani, my friend and colleague, who is the head of New England MUFON, will be speaking on New England UFO events. Rich Dolan, again, our Master of Ceremonies, is another great UFO-related radio buddy. That's Tim Banal. And Tim has another terrific radio show called Banal of America. That's also weekly, but not in conflict with James so you can listen to them both during the week. And he'll be emceeing it. There'll be an opportunity to travel around the area and literally follow the course of the incident at Exeter itself, not to mention the Hills UFO abduction-related event. I should also say, especially for those who are really not familiar with New England, Exeter is a beautiful town in a beautiful state at a gorgeous time of year, early September. For those of us that are not New Englanders, for me it looks like a Currier and Ives print. And one of the great draws of the event is that the town of Exeter has very graciously loaned us their town hall every year for this event. That building, as I recall, was built in 1861. A tremendously historic building. And on that stage, when it was a brand new building, Abraham Lincoln spoke. This is American history. It's just not the brand that we've been fed officially. So it's also all completely free. If you're able to donate, that's wonderful. But everything is open. There will be children-friendly events. There are lots of wonderful beds and breakfasts and modestly priced motels and the like. And if you go to the Exeter UFO Festival.com website, you'll learn everything you need to about it. If you're unable to go, but you know somebody that may live closer to the area, please encourage them to go. I think this is going to be our most successful one yet. I'm very proud to be affiliated with this event, and I think it's going to be a knockout.
Well, I think from a personal viewpoint, I can't make it this year, but I'm going to definitely have to plan on your next one.
Oh, you'd love it.
It's just too beautiful. I do have a question, and this is a very broad, interesting question. Disclosure aside, realistically, what would constitute progress in ufology? How would you rate ufology's progress over the last 70 years?
Wow.
Yes.
That's a great question.
Yes.
I would rate it as hiccuping along, with periods of great contributions and breakthroughs, and others that are a bit more reactionary and provincial, going back to the summer of 1947 when everything kicked in. I think from my studies of the media, which have been extensive, small newspapers, weeklies, and even some dailies around the United States, but village or town-based, have overall done a very fair job of reporting the phenomena. As fair in most cases as major media,